The number on my screen didn't make sense. I blinked twice, refreshed the payroll portal, and stared again. My deposit was short. Not by a few dollars. Not by a tax adjustment. Short by $800. My hands went cold as I clicked through every tab, checking deductions, looking for errors, searching for any explanation that would make this normal. There wasn't one. This wasn't a glitch. Someone had cut my pay, and they'd done it without telling me. My chest tightened as I scrolled to the adjustment notes section. It was blank. No explanation. No warning. Nothing. I sat frozen at my desk while the office buzzed around me with Monday morning energy. Coffee brewing. Keyboards clicking. Someone laughing at an email down the hall. Normal sounds for everyone else. For me, the floor had just dropped out. I saved screenshots of everything, my heart pounding in my ears. Then I stood up, smoothed my shirt, and walked straight to Victor Hale's office. My boss. My supervisor for 3 years. The man who smiled at leadership and sneered at everyone below him. He was about to tell me why my paycheck had been cut without my knowledge or consent. And I was about to decide what happened next. Victor didn't look up when I knocked. He waved me in like I was interrupting something important, though his screen showed ESPN. I stood in the doorway until he finally glanced at me with that expression he always wore around subordinates. Polite boredom mixed with faint annoyance. "What is it, Madeline?" he asked. Kept my voice steady. "My paycheck is $800 short this period. I need to understand why." He leaned back in his chair, fingers laced behind his head like this was amusing. "Oh, that. Yeah, we made a temporary adjustment to your compensation. Nothing to worry about." Temporary adjustment. The words hung in the air like smoke. "I wasn't notified," I said. "And there's no documentation in the system explaining the change." Victor shrugged. "It's a performance-based recalibration. We've been monitoring team alignment, and frankly, your numbers haven't been where they need to be." My numbers. I'd closed more accounts than anyone on the team last quarter. I'd stayed late fixing his mistakes. I'd covered for 2 people who quit because of him. "Can you show me the performance data you're referencing?" "Yes." His smile thinned. "I don't need to justify management decisions to you, Madeline. This is temporary. If you improve your attitude and output, we'll revisit it next quarter. You should be grateful you still have a position here." I stood there absorbing his words. Grateful. He wanted me grateful for having my pay stolen. "I'd like this in writing," I said quietly. "The reason for the pay cut, the performance metrics, and the timeline for review." Victor's expression hardened. "That's not how this works. This is an internal adjustment. I don't need to generate paperwork for every little operational decision I make." Every little operational decision. $100 a month. Nearly $10,000 a year. Little. "Company policy requires written notice for compensation changes," I said. I'd read the handbook twice last year when helping onboard new hires. Employees must be informed in advance of any modifications to their pay structure. Victor leaned forward, his voice dropping to that tone he used when he wanted you to know you were beneath him. "Listen carefully. I'm your supervisor. I make these calls. If you have a problem with how I run my team, maybe this isn't the right fit for you anymore. Plenty of people would be thrilled to have your job at any salary." The threat was clear. "Shut up or get out." I met his eyes and didn't flinch. "I understand. I just want the documentation. For my records." He picked up his phone, dismissing me. "There won't be any documentation. This conversation is over." I walked back to my desk on autopilot, Victor's words echoing in my head. My computer screen still showed the payroll portal, the number that was $800 too low. I closed it and opened my personal files instead. The ones I kept backed up at home. Performance reviews from the past 3 years. All excellent. Comments from Victor himself praising my reliability, my client relationships, my problem solving. "Madeline consistently exceeds expectations. A valuable asset to the team. Her dedication is exemplary." I stared at those words and felt something cold settle in my stomach. This wasn't about performance. This was about power. Victor had waited until I was exhausted. We just finished the busiest quarter of the year. I'd worked 60-hour weeks for 2 months straight, covering for vacant positions while Victor took credit for every success. He'd waited until I was financially vulnerable, emotionally drained, too tired to fight back. He'd calculated this moment, chosen it deliberately, like a predator picking the weakest animal in the herd. I thought about the last 3 years. Every time I'd stayed late fixing his mistakes. Every time I'd smiled through his condescension. Every time I'd watched him take credit for my work while treating me like I was lucky to be there. I'd been loyal, dependable, quiet, and he'd seen that as weakness. I opened a new document and started writing. Not angry rambling. Precise notes. Dates, times, conversations, decisions. I documented every interaction I could remember with Victor over the past 6 months. The project he'd assigned me that wasn't my responsibility. The client meeting he'd sent me to alone, then claimed credit for the outcome. The time he'd asked me to work through lunch to finish his presentation. Every small moment that had felt wrong but not wrong enough to report. I added the pay cut details. The date I discovered it. The exact amount. His response when I confronted him. His refusal to document it. His threat about my job security. The pattern emerged on the page like invisible ink under heat. Victor had been testing boundaries for months, seeing how much he could take, how far he could push before I pushed back. The pay cut wasn't random. It was the next escalation in a strategy he'd been running all along. I saved the document and backed it up to 3 different locations. Then I did something I should have done months ago. I opened the employee handbook and read every single policy about compensation, management authority, and dispute resolution. Victor had made one critical mistake. He thought I was too tired, too scared, too desperate to fight back. He thought wrong. The email arrived the next morning. Subject line. Performance alignment discussion. I opened it to find 3 paragraphs of corporate language that said absolutely nothing. Victor had written about recalibrating team output, and ensuring sustainable productivity models, and aligning compensation structures with current deliverables. Not one specific example. Not one metric. Not one date. Just vague accusations dressed up in management speak, designed to sound official while meaning nothing. I read it 3 times, then opened my personnel file. Every performance review I'd ever received was excellent. Every goal I'd been assigned, I'd met or exceeded. Every project I'd led had succeeded. Victor's email didn't match reality, and he knew it. That's why he'd been so vague. He couldn't cite specific failures because there weren't any. I printed the email and added it to my growing file. Then I did something that felt small but wasn't. I replied, "Thank you for this context. To ensure I understand correctly, could you please specify which deliverables fell short and during which time period? I'd like to address any performance gaps immediately. Additionally, could you confirm whether this compensation adjustment was approved through the standard channels outlined in Section 4.3 of the Employee Handbook?" I kept my tone professional, grateful even. But I'd asked 2 questions Victor couldn't answer honestly. And now it was in writing. He didn't reply. I knew he wouldn't. Instead, I spent my lunch break rereading the Employee Handbook section on pay adjustments. The policy was clear. Any compensation change required written justification, supervisor approval, department head approval, and HR documentation. Employees had to be notified at least 2 weeks in advance with an opportunity to respond. Victor had skipped every single step. He'd changed my pay unilaterally, without notice, without approval, without documentation. That wasn't a management decision. That was wage theft. I closed the handbook and stared at my sandwich without eating it. The smart move would be to go straight to HR, file a formal complaint, get this fixed through official channels. But something stopped me. Victor had been doing this for years. I'd watched him drive out good employees with the same tactics. Micromanagement, gaslighting, subtle threats. then pushing until they either broke or quit. The ones who went to HR got labeled as problem employees. Their complaints got buried in investigations that never concluded. They'd leave eventually, frustrated and defeated, while Victor stayed in his office running the same playbook on the next target. I didn't want to be another statistic in his pattern. I wanted something different. I wanted him to have to explain himself. Not to me. To someone who could actually hold him accountable. I walked down to Payroll the next afternoon with a question that sounded innocent. "Hey, quick process question," I said to Bryce in accounting, a guy I'd helped with a spreadsheet issue last month. "How do pay adjustments usually get processed? I'm trying to understand the workflow for a project I'm documenting." Bryce looked up from his monitor. "Oh, it's pretty standardized. Supervisor submits a request through the system with justification and supporting documentation. That goes to department head for approval, then to HR for review, then to us for implementation. We won't process anything without the full approval chain and at least 2 weeks employee notice." I kept my expression neutral. What if something's time sensitive? I shrugged. Doesn't matter. Policy exists for legal reasons. We can't change someone's pay without proper documentation and notice. We'd be opening the company up to massive liability. I nodded like this was exactly what I'd expected. Makes sense. Thanks. I turned to leave, but Bryce called after me. "Why do you ask?" I glanced back with a smile that felt like glass in my mouth. "Just curious about processes. You know me." His eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't push. I walked back to my desk knowing one critical thing. Payroll's explanation didn't match Victor's story. Oh. Victor started watching me differently after that email. Little things at first. He'd walk past my desk more often, glancing at my screen. He'd ask pointed questions in team meetings about my project timelines. He'd CC himself on emails I sent to clients, something he'd never done before. Then came the criticism. "Madeline, this report format isn't quite right. Redo it." The format was identical to every report I'd done for 2 years. "Madeline, you seemed distracted in that client call. I'd closed a $15,000 renewal. Madeline, I need you to be more of a team player." I'd stayed until 8 the night before covering someone else's deadline. He was baiting me. Waiting for me to snap, to get emotional, to give him ammunition for his performance narrative. I'd seen him do this to others. He'd needle them until they lost their temper, then use their reaction as proof they were unprofessional. But I didn't take the bait. I stayed calm. Thanked him for the feedback. Made the pointless changes without complaint. Documented every interaction. And I watched something interesting happen. My calm rattled him more than anger would have. He'd expected me to fight back or shut down. Instead, I just kept working, kept smiling, kept being exactly as professional as I'd always been. It threw off his script. I thought about Casey during those weeks. She'd worked in Victor's department 2 years ago, before I'd transferred in. Brilliant analyst, always prepared, well liked by everyone except Victor. I'd watched him pick her apart in meetings, question her judgment, undermine her confidence, make jokes at her expense that weren't quite mean enough to report but were cruel enough to sting. She'd started coming in looking exhausted, stressed, like the job was crushing her. Then one day she was just gone. Voluntary resignation, the announcement said. Moving on to new opportunities. I believed it then. Now I understood. Victor had done to Casey what he was trying to do to me. He'd made her job unbearable until leaving felt like the only option. How many others had there been? How many people had Victor quietly destroyed because he could, because he enjoyed it, because no one had ever made him stop? I pulled up Casey's LinkedIn profile that night. She was doing well now, working for a competitor recently promoted. I sent her a message. Just a simple one. Hey, hope you're doing great at your new place. Quick question. Did you ever have issues with compensation when you worked here? She responded within an hour. Why do you ask? I told her. Not everything, just enough. Her reply came fast. He did the same thing to me. I couldn't prove it. I left instead. Be careful, Madeline. He's good at covering his tracks. My next paycheck dropped 2 weeks later. I opened it knowing what I'd find. Another cut. Smaller this time. $200. Not enough to devastate me financially, but enough to send a message. Victor was testing me again, seeing if I'd escalate or break. I smiled at my computer screen. He just made a critical mistake. One pay cut could be argued as an administrative decision, however wrong. 2 pay cuts established a pattern. 2 pay cuts showed intent. I screenshot everything, added it to my documentation, and did something Victor wouldn't expect. I sent him another email. Hi Victor, I noticed another adjustment to my compensation this period. Could you help me understand the timeline for these changes and what specific metrics are being used to evaluate my performance? I want to make sure I'm addressing the right areas for improvement. I'm committed to meeting all expectations and would appreciate clarity on what success looks like moving forward. Professional, grateful, earnest. And now he had to respond or look like he was avoiding documentation. He replied an hour later. Madeline, these adjustments are part of an ongoing performance evaluation. Continue focusing on your current deliverables and we'll reassess at quarter end. Current deliverables. Quarter end. Vague timeline. No specifics. But he'd replied. In writing. Confirming he'd made multiple pay adjustments. Confirming there was an ongoing evaluation. Contradicting his earlier claim that this was temporary. I printed the email and added it to my file. Things started happening that I didn't control. Payroll noticed. I didn't report anything. I didn't file a complaint. But payroll systems flag anomalies automatically. And apparently, an employee receiving multiple unexplained pay reductions within 60 days qualified as an anomaly. Bryce from accounting mentioned it casually when I passed his desk. Hey Madeline, our system kicked back some alerts on your account. Multiple adjustments without the standard approval workflow. I flagged it for review. My heart jumped, but I kept my voice steady. Oh, I didn't realize that would trigger anything. I shrugged. It's automatic. Anytime compensation changes without following protocol, the system alerts us. We have to investigate to make sure everything's compliant. It's probably nothing, but we'll need to verify the paperwork. I nodded and walked away before he could see my hands shaking. This was happening. Not because I'd pushed it, but because Victor had been so arrogant he hadn't even covered his tracks properly. He changed my pay through some back-channel override, probably assuming no one would notice or care. He'd underestimated the system. And he'd underestimated me. 2 days later the email came. Payroll compliance review. Required attendance. It was addressed to me, Victor, and the department head. Date and time listed. Conference room reserved. My stomach flipped. This was real now. Victor tried to pull me aside the next morning. His whole demeanor had changed. The smugness was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like nervousness. Madeline, hey, do you have a minute? I followed him into an empty meeting room. He closed the door and turned to me with what I think was supposed to be a friendly smile. Listen, I know things have been tense lately. I think maybe we got off on the wrong foot with these compensation adjustments. Compensation adjustments. Not pay cuts. He was already reframing. I want to make this right, he continued. What if we reversed the changes, got everything back to normal, and just moved forward? Clean slate. No need to make this a big formal thing with payroll and HR. I looked at him carefully. He was scared. Actually scared. You want to reverse the pay cuts before the compliance review? Yes. Exactly. We fix it internally, keep it simple, everyone's happy. I can submit the adjustment today and we can tell payroll it was just an administrative error that's been corrected. No harm, no foul. He was offering me an exit. Take the money back, sweep everything under the rug, pretend none of this happened. 6 months ago I would have taken it. I appreciate that, I said slowly. But I think we should let the review process play out. If it was just an error, that'll come out in the investigation, right? His expression shifted. The fake friendliness evaporated. Madeline, I'm trying to help you here. You don't want to make enemies in this company. People who rock the boat don't tend to have long careers. There it was. The threat I'd been waiting for. Is that an official warning about my job security? Yes. Victor caught himself, realizing he'd said too much. No, of course not. I'm just giving you advice. Friendly advice. These compliance reviews can get messy. They dig into everything. Your performance record, your reliability, your attitude. Sometimes it's better to resolve things quietly. He was trying to scare me into backing down, but all I heard was panic. He wouldn't be offering to reverse the cuts if he had any confidence in his position. He wouldn't be threatening me if he thought he could win through proper channels. I met his eyes and kept my voice calm. I think I'll let the review happen. But thank you for the offer. I left him standing in that meeting room looking like he'd swallowed glass. That night I had a phone interview scheduled. A competitor had reached out 3 weeks ago about an opening. I'd been considering it casually, but after this conversation, I took it seriously. The interview went well. Very well. They talked about culture, respect, growth opportunities. Things Victor's department hadn't offered in years. They mentioned a salary range. It was higher than what I'd been making before the cuts. Much higher. The offer came through 2 days later. Formal, detailed, everything in writing. Better pay, better title, better company culture based on everything I'd researched. I printed it and put it in my desk drawer but didn't respond yet. I wanted to see this through first. The compliance review was scheduled for Friday. That gave me 3 days to prepare. I organized my documentation into a clean folder. Pay stubs showing both cuts. Emails from Victor with contradictory explanations. Performance reviews proving his claims about my work were false. Screenshots of company policy he'd violated. Bryce's explanation of proper procedures. I didn't add commentary or emotion. Just facts, dates, evidence. Let the documents speak for themselves. Victor started avoiding me. He'd see me in the hallway and suddenly need to take a call. He'd skip team meetings he'd normally attend. Twice I caught him watching me from his office with an expression I couldn't read. On Thursday afternoon, I got an email from Payroll confirming tomorrow's meeting and listing what would be discussed. Compensation history. Authorization procedures. Policy compliance. Discrepancy resolution. It was professional, clinical, exactly what a compliance review should be. But reading it made my hands shake. This was actually happening. Tomorrow, Victor would have to explain what he'd done. Not to me. To Payroll, HR, and our department head. People who could actually do something about it. Friday morning arrived with gray skies and rain. I dressed carefully in my most professional outfit, ate breakfast even though I wasn't hungry, and arrived at work 30 minutes early. The compliance review was scheduled for 10. I spent the morning doing normal work or trying to. My brain kept jumping ahead to that conference room, to Victor's face when he'd have to answer questions he couldn't dodge. At 9:45, I gathered my folder and walked to the conference room. Victor was already there, sitting on one side of the table with his laptop open and a coffee he wasn't drinking. He didn't look at me when I entered. I took a seat on the opposite side, setting my folder on the table in front of me. The silence was heavy. Neither of us spoke. I watched the clock tick from 9:50 to 9:55. At 9:58, Bryce arrived with another woman from Payroll I recognized but didn't know well. Teresa, I think. They both carried tablets and official-looking folders. At 10 exactly, our department head walked in. His name was Keith Warren, a man I'd met maybe twice in 3 years. He nodded at both of us and took the head of the table. "Thank you both for being here," Keith said. "This is a standard compliance review triggered by system alerts. We're here to clarify some discrepancies and ensure everything's properly documented. Let's keep this professional and straightforward." Bryce opened his tablet and pulled up a spreadsheet. "We'll start with the compensation history. Madeline, your base salary was $62,000 annually until September 15th, when it was reduced to $52,000. Then on October 1st, It was further reduced to 49,000. Is that correct? The room was so quiet I could hear the rain against the windows. Yes, I said. That's correct. Bryce turned to Victor. Can you walk us through the authorization process for these adjustments? Victor cleared his throat. Sure. These were performance-based modifications implemented as part of a broader team evaluation. We identified areas where Madeline's output wasn't meeting departmental standards, and adjusted compensation accordingly to reflect current value contribution. It sounded rehearsed, corporate, meaningless. Teresa looked up from her notes. Do you have the performance documentation that supported these decisions? Victor hesitated. The evaluation was based on ongoing observation and managerial assessment. It's not always practical to document every data point in a formal review structure. But there is documentation, Keith said. It wasn't a question. Some, Victor said carefully. Though much of it is qualitative rather than quantitative. Bryce tapped his tablet. Per company policy section 4.3. All compensation changes require written justification with specific performance metrics, supervisor approval, department head approval, and HR sign-off. Do we have those documents? Victor's face tightened. I submitted the requests through the expedited management portal. Sometimes urgent situations require streamlined processes. There is no expedited management portal for compensation changes, Teresa said flatly. There's one approval workflow, and it requires multiple signatures and minimum 2-week employee notice. The air in the room shifted. Keith was watching Victor with an expression I couldn't quite read. Victor, Keith said slowly, are you saying you changed Madeline's pay without following standard procedures? I used my managerial authority to make operational decisions in real time, Victor said. His voice had an edge now. I don't need to generate paperwork for every minor adjustment. An $800 monthly reduction isn't minor, Bryce said. That's nearly 20% of her salary. And doing it twice compounds the issue. Teresa turned to me. Madeline, were you notified in advance of either pay change? Every eye in the room turned to me. This was the moment. The moment I'd been building toward since I first saw that short paycheck. Kept my voice steady and clear. No, I wasn't notified. I discovered the first reduction when I checked my deposit. When I asked Victor about it, he called it a temporary adjustment and refused to provide documentation. I requested written explanation multiple times. He declined and told me to be grateful I still had a job. The silence that followed was complete. Keith leaned forward. Victor, is that accurate? Victor's jaw worked. That's a mischaracterization of our conversation. I explained the situation thoroughly and offered context about performance expectations. Did you provide written documentation when she requested it? Keith asked. I didn't feel it was necessary given the temporary nature of the adjustment. Did you notify her before making the changes? Bryce asked. Victor's hands flexed on the table. The situation required immediate action. I exercised my judgment as her direct supervisor. That's not an answer, Teresa said. Did you notify her yes or no? No, Victor said finally. But I had valid reasons. Keith's expression was stone. Walk me through your valid reasons for unilaterally cutting an employee's pay by 20% without notice, documentation, or approval. Victor's carefully constructed composure started cracking. Madeline has been underperforming for months. Her attitude has been problematic. She questions decisions, pushes back on directives, doesn't show appropriate respect for management authority. I needed to send a clear message about expectations without creating a formal HR situation that would damage her record. It was fascinating, watching him try to justify what he'd done. He actually believed his own story. Do you have evidence of this underperformance? Keith asked. Her last 3 annual reviews are all excellent. Victor scrambled. Recent behavior. Last quarter specifically. She's been difficult to manage. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. Teresa was already pulling up records on her tablet. According to system logs, Madeline closed more client accounts than anyone in your department last quarter. Her project completion rate is 98%. Her client satisfaction scores are the highest on your team. She looked at Victor. Where's the underperformance? Victor's face flushed. Numbers don't tell the whole story. There are intangibles, team dynamics, attitude issues that don't show up in metrics. Did you document these attitude issues? Bryce asked. Did you give her any formal warnings or performance improvement plans? I addressed them in conversations, Victor said. Private coaching sessions. Without documentation, Keith said. Right. Victor sensed he was losing. Look, I've been managing people for 15 years. I know how to handle personnel issues. Madeline needed correction and I corrected her. Maybe I should have generated more paperwork, but the decision itself was sound. The decision to cut her pay without notice or approval, Teresa said slowly, violated at minimum 4 company policies and potentially several labor laws. That's not a paperwork issue, Victor. That's a compliance failure. Keith looked at me. Madeline, did you ever consent to these pay reductions? It was such a simple question. Such an obvious question. But hearing it asked officially in front of witnesses, with documentation and authority behind it, made something in my chest release. No, I said. I never consented. I was never asked. The room stayed quiet for a long moment. Keith exchanged looks with Bryce and Teresa. Something unspoken passed between them. We need to pause here, Keith said. Victor, Madeline, thank you for your time. We'll review everything discussed today and follow up with next steps. Victor stood quickly, gathering his laptop like he couldn't wait to leave. I stayed seated, watching him walk out without meeting anyone's eyes. After the door closed, Keith turned to me. Madeline, I apologize that this situation occurred. We take wage compliance extremely seriously. Payroll will initiate corrective measures immediately, and there will be a formal investigation into the authorization process. What does that mean? Yes. Bryce answered. It means we'll calculate exactly what you're owed in back pay and process it as emergency compensation. We'll also review Victor's authority over payroll access and determine if policy violations warrant disciplinary action. Teresa added, you should expect to be contacted by HR for a formal statement. If you have documentation of conversations with Victor, please provide copies. And Madeline, he paused. Thank you for bringing this forward. This kind of thing shouldn't happen here. I nodded, not trusting my voice. They filed out, leaving me alone in the conference room. I sat there staring at my folder, at all the evidence I'd gathered, and felt something enormous settle in my chest. It was over. Done it. The rest of that day moved in a blur. Bryce sent me an email within 2 hours confirming that my pay would be corrected retroactively, and that all adjustments Victor had made were being reversed pending investigation. Keith scheduled a follow-up meeting with HR for Monday. People started whispering in the office. Word spread fast that something had happened with Victor and payroll. I didn't confirm or deny anything. I just kept working. Victor didn't come back to the office that afternoon. His door stayed closed and dark. On Monday morning, I arrived to find Victor's parking spot empty. His office was being cleaned out by someone from facilities. I asked Bryce what happened. He was careful with his words. Victor's been placed on administrative leave pending the investigation. His access to payroll systems has been revoked, and all his management authority has been suspended. I processed that information silently. How long have you been documenting what he did? Bryce asked quietly. I met his eyes. Long enough. He nodded. Good. People like him count on everyone being too scared or tired to fight back. You weren't. That afternoon I received my corrected paycheck. Every dollar he'd taken, plus interest, plus a formal apology from the company. The deposit hit my account and I stared at it for a long time. Not because of the money, though that mattered, but because of what it represented. Victor had tried to steal from me, intimidate me, break me. And I'd made him explain himself to people who had power over him. Victor sent me a message late Monday night. Personal email, not company. Madeline, I think there's been a significant misunderstanding about my intentions regarding the compensation adjustments. I never meant to create hardship or distress. I was attempting to motivate improvement through financial incentive structure, perhaps misguidedly. I'm requesting your assistance in clarifying the situation to HR and payroll. If you could explain that this was a mutual performance discussion rather than a unilateral action, it would help resolve this matter quickly. I've always valued your contributions to the team and would hate to see both our careers damaged by miscommunication. I read it 3 times. He was asking me to lie for him. To tell HR this was somehow my idea, or mutual, or a misunderstanding. To help him cover up what he'd done. To save him. After everything he'd done to me. He thought I'd save him. I closed the email without responding. Deleted it. Blocked his personal address. He'd made his choices. He could live with the consequences. On Tuesday, HR called me in for my formal statement. I brought my documentation and walked them through everything. They took notes, asked questions, thanked me for my thoroughness. On Wednesday, I submitted my resignation letter. Professional, grateful, effective immediately. I'd already accepted the offer from the competitor. Better pay, better role, better everything. I was done with this place. My last day was quiet. I packed my desk, said goodbye to the few people I'd miss, and walked out without ceremony. No farewell lunch. No speeches. Just a clean exit on my own terms. The back pay had already cleared. My new job started the following Monday. I'd won, but it didn't feel like I'd imagined. There was no triumphant music. No dramatic confrontation where Victor admitted everything and begged forgiveness. Just paperwork, process, and the slow grinding of institutional accountability. 2 weeks later, I heard through former colleagues that Victor had been terminated. Not for the pay cuts specifically, but for the pattern of policy violations the investigation uncovered. Apparently, I wasn't the first person he'd done this to. Just the first person who'd documented it thoroughly enough to make it stick. The company settled quietly with 2 other former employees who came forward after my case. Victor's LinkedIn profile still listed him as employed there for another 3 months before finally updating to seeking new opportunities. I never spoke to him again. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I'd stayed silent. If I'd just accepted the pay cut, absorbed the loss, and kept my head down like he expected. He'd still be there, doing the same thing to someone else. That person might not have my documentation skills or my stubborn refusal to let injustice slide. They might have just quit like Casey did, like others before her. My new job was everything they'd promised. Respectful management, clear communication, fair compensation. Nobody cut my pay without warning. Nobody tried to gaslight me about my performance. Nobody made me feel small for asking questions or wanting documentation. It was astonishing how different work felt when you weren't constantly bracing for the next attack. I got promoted 6 months in. My manager called me into her office, and for a split second, old instincts kicked in. That familiar tension, waiting for criticism or some invented problem. But she just smiled and told me I'd been doing excellent work and they wanted to expand my role. Everything in writing. Clear expectations. Fair timeline. Professional, respectful, normal. I almost cried. Not because of the promotion but because this was what work was supposed to feel like. What I'd been missing for years under Victor's management. I'd forgotten what it was like to be valued. On my 1-year anniversary at the new company, I got a message on LinkedIn from Casey, the analyst who'd left Victor's department before me. I heard what happened with Victor. Thank you for doing what I couldn't. You helped more people than you know. I didn't know how to respond, so I just said thank you and that I hope she was doing well. She replied immediately. I'm great now. And you proved something important. They're not untouchable. We can fight back. I kept the folder of documentation for a long time. All those screenshots, emails, pay stubs. Evidence of what Victor had done and how I'd responded. Eventually I deleted most of it. I didn't need to carry it anymore. But I kept one thing. The email from Keith confirming that my pay would be corrected and that the company took the situation seriously. I kept it as a reminder. Not of revenge, but of something more important. That documentation matters. That calm persistence beats angry outbursts. That systems can work if you understand them and use them correctly. That people who abuse power count on their victims staying silent. And that sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is let them explain themselves to someone who can actually hold them accountable. Victor cut my pay without warning. He thought I'd stay quiet, stay grateful, stay beaten. Instead, I let him explain it to Payroll. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I didn't quit in anger. I just documented everything, followed the process, and watched him destroy himself trying to justify what he'd done. The last I heard, he was working in a much smaller role at a much smaller company. I'm doing just fine. Better than fine. Because I learned something Victor never understood. Power isn't about intimidation. It's about knowing the rules better than the people trying to break them. And I knew the rules.